Salutations Rangers, General Bradley 101, back again with some more lore. And in today's video, ladies and gentlemen, we're back with our What People Get Wrong About X series. And today, we got a special one. For today, we're talking about the Night Lords, the 8th Legion of a Dominus Nox, baby. So strap on in, grab your blood cups, some flayed skin, and get ready to talk about the monsters of Nostromo. The 8th Legion as a startee were originally known as the Night's Children, and they were founded on Terra from the Terran Sinks, that being massive prison complexes found underground from Terra. Basically, all the prisoners from the upper hive cities were thrown into the underground to live in darkness deprived of light, deemed that they were unworthy because of whatever crime they have committed. Now, there were some children that were born in these underneath prisons, and hence, being not born from sunlight or experiencing any type of fresh air, it gave them a pale appearance, a somewhat sickly appearance, though physically they were said to be relatively intact, and thus they were named as the Night's Children. The Emperor saw these and found out that they were quite compatible with the 8th Legion gene seed, and thus the majority of recruits came from here, and they were used as the Emperor's instrument of retribution. If a planet or region had rebelled against the Emperor, they would send the 8th to quell them into submission. Eventually they would meet their Primarch, Konrad Curze from Nostromo, and he would transform them into the Night Lords. From there, they would be synonymous with Terra throughout the entirety of the Great Crusade. Their tactics initially started off somewhat mild, but by the end of the Great Crusade and the beginning of the Heresy, they had full-on devolved into horrible murderous psychopaths, often flaying their victims alive and wearing their skin as some type of sick trophy. Eventually, Konrad Curze would turn traitor and lead his legion in rebelling against the Emperor, and he would delve further and further into madness, eventually meeting his end at the hands of a Calidus assassin. And after the mysterious disappearance of First Captain Sevatar, the legion would shatter and break up into various different warbands. So, that is the Night Lords. But now, let me ask you this. What do people get wrong about the Night Lords? And the answer is everything, but also nothing at all. It's a weird one, I know, but stick with me. In modern day 40k, people don't get anything wrong about the Night Lords. The Night Lords are horrible, murderous psychopaths, and that's what they are. They're cowards. The vast majority of Terran-born Night Lords are dead, if not all of them completely dead. The only things that are left are the terrible, evil criminals from Nostromo. You see, when Curze took over Nostromo, he did it through fear of the Night Haunter's retribution. But when Curze up and left, the Nostromo nobles, well, the Night Haunter wasn't there, so why fear? So instead of sending him the best of the best, the most noble and honorable from Nostromo, they then sent him the worst of the worst, the most psychotic, evil, depraved, and terrible killers that Nostromo had to offer. And thus, those who were made into Space Marines were not the best of the best, but the worst of the worst. Also, it's worthy of note that the emotional and mental conditioning that most Space Marines go through was nearly absent or completely ineffective in the Night Lords' case. They were quite psychotic. This was probably due to the fact that the recruitment of the Night Lords was, less than stellar. The Night Lords are cowards. They never take a fair fight, they don't like to fight, they are terrible at fighting, other Space Marines that is. They can still kill them, but in a straight up fight a Night Lord is not going to do too hot. Hence why they don't fight straight. They will often look for any and all advantage and run at the first sign of terror. They are murderers, killers, they are psychopaths, they are evil, they are cowards, they are nothing. And people get that right. The Night Lords are simple. They are evil, they are corruption, they are terrible. And that's why people love them. They're just monsters. There's no ifs, ands, or buts to them, they are terrible, evil monsters. And people like that because they're monsters. They're fucking sick. They're cool. Look at their armor and shit. It's fucking metal as fuck. So people don't get that aspect wrong about the Night Lords. I've seen some people try and justify the Night Lords, try and place some claim to them, but no. People often point to the Night Lords trilogy and point at Talos. Talos is the exception that proves the rule. Even he states he's an exception to the Night Lords, and even he says he's still a bad man. The Night Lords are meant to be this evil, conniving, cowardly faction. You're supposed to hate them because they're cowards, but you're supposed to love them because they're monsters. And ultimately, in that regard, people don't get the Night Lords wrong. They're exactly what they say on the tin. In fact, what they get wrong is trying to give them more than that. The Night Lords have no underlying moral high ground to them. In modern day 40k, they are fully corrupted and fully lost. In modern day 40k, that is. As I mentioned earlier, what people get wrong about the Night Lords is that 1, they get nothing wrong, but 2, they get everything wrong. And that's because of what the Night Lords were supposed to be. Every single traitor legion is a tragedy. They are tragic in their fall, falling from the noble graces of the honored Legiones Astartes into whatever depraved, vile machinations they now find themselves in. That is the tragedy. But the Night Lords, they are especially tragic. More so than tragic, they're just sad. As I mentioned before, the Night Lords were brought up from the Terran Sinks, that being the collective name for the underground prisons beneath Terra. They were the children of the night, Night's children. But you need to understand is that the law in Terra was very different from ours. It wasn't consistent, and it depends. Sometimes your crime could be vicious and terrible, such as genocide, but in other cases your crime could be displeasing the local warlord. Oftentimes these children were victims of injustice, and just because their parents did evil, why should they suffer? But no one cared. The Emperor, though, he cared, at least to some degree. He came to those sinks, and he lifted Night's children out of that vile pit. He gave them purpose, and their purpose was justice, but more specifically, retribution. As you can imagine, the Night's children had a great sense of justice, because they were victims of injustice. Now that sense of justice may have been a little bit twisted and a bit maligned, given that the nature of the sinks was to fight or die, but they still had that sense of justice to them, even if it was a bit warped. One of their most notable actions was against the Sargol Covens. When the Emperor had conquered them, he had outlawed the use of gene-enhancing psychic mutations, the creation of psychic monsters essentially. The Sargol Covens had ignored the Emperor's decree, and thus they continued with their work. When the Emperor found out, he was said to be enraged, and thus he was simply said to give one single order: send the Eighth. And thus did the Reapers of the Emperor descend, and did they reap bloody retribution. And throughout the Great Crusade, before they met with Curze, that's what they were. They were a tool of retribution. They were monsters, yes, but not as monsters the Night Lords would become. From all the records that we have, the Proto-Eighth did not enjoy this. They did not take pleasure in it. They did not mark their armor with skin or bones. We know that because that was a direct introduction of Konrad Curze himself. Not exactly the skin and bones, but he said to make their armor frightening and terrible to scare man. Only when his legion became corrupted with the filth of Nostromo did it become so macabre. The Eighth Legion were a necessary evil. They did not enjoy what they did, but they knew that they were needed. And this is a truth that many people tend to shy away from because it's not pretty. Not everything can have a happy ending. Not every time when you fight someone will they accept defeat. Not every time will they keep the peace. Sometimes, through their own hubris or their own thoughts, they will decide that they will take up arms again, that they will rebel again. They will decide in their hearts that this is what is right, and they will commit to it. It was for this reason that the Emperor created the Night Lords. For when you try and occupy a world, or any place for that matter, it does not matter if you say that you win. The other side must accept that you have won. And there are two ways to do this. One is the way of the Ultramarines or the Salamanders, where you integrate the people into the population. You convince them that life under you was better than the previous life, and you help them to love you rather than to hate you. But some people do not wish to love. They'd rather hate. And to those people, the Emperor sent in the Eighth. The Eighth was meant to break your heart, to break your spirit, to scar you so wholly and deeply that should you ever think about rebelling again, that scar of the bloody Eighth, their flashing knives and their gnashing teeth would remind you of the pain and horror that you suffered. Then your heart would break, and any and all thoughts of rebellion would fade with it. And that is a necessary evil. You need men who are willing to do that. You need men who are willing to hurt others. You need men who are willing to scar others. I know that a lot of you hearing that may lash out at me and claim that I am some evil monster and that how could I, things can always be resolved through words. But I say this not with a smile on my face, but I say this as someone who regrets saying it. But it is true. Sometimes words can only go so far. Sometimes actions can only go so far. Sometimes people can be so stubborn that the only way for them to learn is for them to get hurt. Now, I'm not referring to the deeds of the Night Lords, but I mean in general. If you tell a friend not to do something, do not love that person, they will hurt you, and they ignore you time and time again. Sometimes the only thing that you have left to do is to let them get hurt and feel the pain for themselves, and learned their lesson like that. In the Great Crusade, the Emperor wanted to restore humanity. Now, whether or not you agree with him, that's a different story entirely. But for the Emperor to do that, he needed the worlds behind him to not rise up in revolt. And after a world had been conquered, after it had been established, after it had been repaired, and years after that, if they still did not wish to embrace the Imperium, which, more often than not, was better than what they were living in. Remember, most of these worlds had been cut off for thousands of years, and were living on scraps. Regardless of how you view the Emperor, he did give them more than what they had, but to some people that is not worth their freedom, so they will rise up, and they will choose to fight. And that is when the 8th was sent in. The 8th was sent in to break their spirits, so that they would not dare to rise again. Whereas you had the 1st Legion, which was meant to destroy a foe. You had the 6th Legion, which was meant to be the strong right hand of the Emperor. You had the 18th Legion, which was meant to be the warding shepherd of the wayward souls, the guardians of humanity. You had the 13th Legion, which were meant to be the organizers and the administrators of the Imperium. The 8th Legion were meant to send a message. Do not fuck with the Imperium. And the 8th knew what they were. They were tools. Necessary evil. The Proto-8th did not take any joy in what they did. They did not find themselves as heroes. They did not try and justify their actions. They knew that they were monsters, but they were monsters that served the Emperor, and to them that was enough. Ultimately, there was no grey for the 8th Legion. There was only black and white. There were only those deserving of their protection, and those deserving of their wrath. But ultimately, the key difference between the Proto-8th and the 8th under Curze was that they did not decide who got their wrath. It was the Emperor who decided. The Emperor would give them orders and the 8th would carry it out. The 8th would not do anything without the Emperor's consent. They were the Emperor's retribution, his fear, but only to those whom the Emperor had decreed were worthy. Where it starts to come apart is when Curze is reintroduced to his legion. Konrad Curze is a complex character in Warhammer 40k, mainly because he's bipolar. Well, he's assumed to be bipolar, but many people believe that due to the sheer amount of trauma he suffered as a child in Nostromo, his personality was split into two halves. Konrad Curze, the noble paragon of justice, and the Night Haunter, the sick, twisted, depraved villain of Nostromo, and thus did these two clash at each other. The most notable example we have of this is when he was speaking with Royal Dawn, and all of a sudden, he lashed out in a violent rage and attacked him, wounding the Primarch. When he is found by Sanguinius, he is said to be sobbing in a corner, his hands still covered with his brother's blood. He is said to be a broken man at the time. And whereas Sanguinius also saw visions of the future, Curze also saw the visions, but his were more skewed towards negativity, whether it was because he only saw the negative outcomes, or whether because of his upbringing he only paid heed to the negative outcomes. It twisted his mind, and eventually he went from what was supposed to be a paragon of justice into a twisted, maligned monster. Someone who cared about being right more than they ever did care about getting better. Because to Curze, the only way to fix it was to prove that he was from the start meant to be a monster. Because that meant that everything he did was right. Because he couldn't change anything. He had no power. He was simply, always, just meant to be a monster. Thus did he himself take no blame for the horrendous acts that he did. But moreover, the horrendous acts that his legion did. The 8th Legion, under Konrad Curze, initially saw some promise. Curze did increase the intensity of their acts, yes. He did encourage them to be more physically scary, to appear more. They were after all his sons, and he was an effigy of fear. Thus did he make them more fearful. But that at the time didn't really cause their downfall. What truly caused their downfall was the descent of Konrad Curze into the Night Haunter, and the corruption of the recruitment ground of the 8th. As I mentioned before, the emotional and mental conditioning that most Space Marines go under was, in some cases, completely absent or very, very minor for the 8th Legion. This was because that the recruitment of the 8th was in the hands of people who didn't care for the Legion nor the Night Haunter. Thus they didn't give a damn. They sent gangers, murderers, rapists, terrible, evil people to become Space Marines. And this only further accelerated their downfall. The Legion became polluted with cowards and wicked men. Thus, whereas originally they were the knight's children, men who had been haunted and tormented, men who had been wrought by injustice, and thus they only sought to be the Emperor's hand of justice, his hand of retribution. They had now become an army of murderers and killers, concerned only for themselves. They went from being selfless to selfish. And that's why most of the loyalist Night Lords were some of the old Terran veterans, those who still cared about unity, those who remember the cries and shouts, but moreover, the dark and terrible night in the Terran sinks, and the Lord of Lightning who lifted them up into the light, and who for them, they would continue to work in shadow. But for the rest of the Night Lords, those from Nostromo, they were gangsters. They cared about only themselves and making themselves better. This is represented by the culture of the Legion. Eventually, gangs would become prominent within the Legion. Literally, the gangs from Nostromo would translate into the Legion, because the gangers that became Space Marines, they didn't have their mental conditioning to remove that allegiance. So, gang fights would often happen in the Legions. Legionaries would murder other legionaries over spite, turf, or anything for that matter. Old grudges held true, and many of them didn't change at all. They simply got stronger, but they were still at the core rotten. Hence, the Primarch, Konrad Curze, hated his legion. The Night Haunter hated them, for he saw them as villains, being rewarded for their villainy. Konrad Curze hated them because his noble paragons of retribution had turned into the exact thing he wanted to destroy. They had failed him, and he had failed them. The Night Lords were supposed to be a necessary evil, a necessary fact that sometimes people will not learn on their own. A fact that sometimes people will not listen to words. They will not learn from a strong hand. Hell, they won't even learn from a punch. Sometimes the only way they can learn is to have their heart scarred, to bear terrible pain. Only then can they truly learn. And like everything with the Emperor, it was radicalized, jumped to 10. Instead of experiencing heartbreak, the people of the Imperium would experience the 8th Legion. But under the Emperor, they were controlled. There was still some noble dignity about them, if it was indeed twisted and maligned. But at the end of the heresy, the 8th Legion was not that. They went from men who understood that fear was a necessary tool, but still evil, to men who simply delighted in hearing the screams of children, wicked, terrible beings. And we saw that again in the Night Lords trilogy. Talos wanted to restore his legion. He wanted them to have some sense of pride in them. He hated how they were cowards, how they preyed on innocents, how they preyed on weaklings. He wasn't a good, just, noble man, no, but he despised that they had become wicked and weak. He despised pain for pain's sake. He will still gladly use torture and fear as a weapon, but as a tool, not for his own goals. He did not enjoy torturing people, but he used it as a tool, as the old 8th Legion had, as Konrad Curze had urged them to do. But sadly, he is the exception, not the rule. And thus, looking at it, we come to the same conclusion that we do with all traitor legions. The Night Lords are the tragedy, whereas the Emperor had them to be the necessary evil. Fear made manifest his retribution to prevent the populace from uprising again. What were they supposed to be? I personally think they were supposed to be like the Blood Angels. Sanguinius took a legion of revenants, evil, things which people called to be destroyed, and turned them into angels, beautiful and magnificent. In truth, the Night Lords had two fathers, Konrad Curze and the Night Haunter. If they only had one father, well, we know how they would turn out. If the Night Haunter was only their father, they turned out exactly how they would turn out. Marauding, evil, scheming, villainous, murdering psychopaths not worthy of the title man, let alone Astartes. But if Konrad Curze was just their father, well, what could they have been? Curze was not a noble, just paladin of goodness by any stretch of the imagination. He had a twisted sense of justice, a flawed sense of morality, but that was mainly because of his home world and where he grew up. If the Emperor had nurtured him, changed him a bit, he would still be Konrad Curze. He would still be brutal, he would still use fear, he would still use torture, but he would use it selectively. The 8th Legion would not indulge in it. They would not feast on it. They would not find vigor and vitae in it. They wouldn't. They would use it as a tool on those whom the Emperor had deemed evil. They would be the evil that hunted other evil. They would be the darkness that consumed the shadow looming over humanity. I personally believe that is what they were supposed to be. Twisted, terrible, evil, yes, but an odd nobility to them. Something redeeming. That is what the Night Lords should have been. That is what the Night Lords wanted to be. That is what Konrad Curze wanted them to be. But that is not what they are. In the end of the day, the Night Lords are twisted, murdering psychopaths. Tragic. They are a tragedy made manifest. What was supposed to be a legion of noble evil was twisted and changed and malign into the worst kind of evil. Cowards. Who prey on weakness, who would rather listen to the screams of a baby being flensed of its soft skin than even dare to stand against a fellow Astartes. They truly are one of the most evil legions in Warhammer 40k, and one of the most disgusted legions. As I mentioned before, if you love the Night Lords and you're a fan of the Night Lords, you're a fan of their aesthetic. Pure and simple. You love the fact that they're butchers, that they're evil, they're just terrible and they look fucking awesome. That is what you love, because there is no redeemable qualities to them. There is no relating to them. No one loves the Night Lords because of what they represent, because what they represent is evil. Mayhaps there are a few of you who see the tragedy in the Night Lords and you kind of vibe with that, but that's one thing, sure. But ultimately, there is nothing about the Night Lords that is redeemable, and that's fine. Not every character, not every faction has to have something redeemable about it. Having one or two characters or factions that are just fucking crazy but fucking cool at the same time, that's cool. That's great. Evil is evil, and evil is fucking cool sometimes. But the issue that we have is that there are a lot of people who seem to try and justify the Night Lords, who try and claim them as morally righteous, doing what needed to be done when no one else would. And yes, there are people who think that the Night Lords are morally good. And if you think that the Night Lords are anything morally good, seek help. Especially in 40k. But no. They do what was needed to be done, yes, but that doesn't make them good. Evil done in the service of good is still evil. The difference is that there is something redeemable about doing that. Doing something that has to be done. Doing evil for the sake of good. You can make an argument that there's something noble about that. Self-sacrificing even. But in modern 40k, the Night Lords the way that they are, there is nothing redeemable, nothing noble about them, and that is perfectly fine. It's good even. The Night Lords are cowards, they're evil and terrible. Yet, once in a blue moon you get someone like Talos, who gives us a glimpse as to what the old Night Lords, the true Night Lords, were supposed to be. And it's scary, because it's all the brutality of a Night Lord, but none of the malice, none of the cowardice, none of the stupidity, and just a hint of nobility. No wonder people love that damn book so much. But to sum it up, what people get wrong about the Night Lords is, in 40k, nothing at all. They are meant to be evil, but that's it. There is no redeeming qualities to them. They are evil. Full stop. There is nothing redeemable. There is nothing noble. And that's perfectly fine. You don't have to relate to a faction to like it. You can like the Night Lords because they're fucking vampire space marines who are fucking wacky, evil, terrible. And for what people get wrong about the Night Lords in 30k, they were never destined to become what they were in 40k. They are a tragic story, and all it would have taken was one hand turning them in another direction, and they would have become what I think they were supposed to be. Noble evil. Men who do torture and do evil things, but only to the evil. Only to those who deserve it. And if evil is done to evil, is the action still evil? Or is it somehow good, but not truly good? Some twisted sense of the word. Should we laud them? Should we praise them? Or should we condemn them? What are they? But that is what they could have been, and what they most definitely are not in Warhammer 40k. But the Night Lords, ladies and gentlemen, are murder Batman. Terrible, evil, absolutely disgusting, and totally fucking cool. Goddamn, these bastards look great. The fucking bat helms with the lightning bolts. Oh, it's so fucking peak. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so very much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed this video. This is one of my hardest videos to ever make, and I think this is going to be my hardest of this whole series because I don't like the Night Lords at all. I have never looked into them in any fashion. I haven't even read the trilogy because I'm a Salamanders fan. The Night Lords represent everything I fucking despise about Space Marines and people in general, but looking into them and reading into them, I did gain a newfound sense of appreciation for them. I always loved their aesthetics. They look fucking sick. But looking into the Proto-Night Lords, I found out that their story is just as tragic. The 8th Legion in 40k and the Horus Heresy is the 8th Legion. There's no redeeming qualities there and there's nothing there, but looking into what their past was and looking into what they could have become, you kinda get a little bit of feels for them. They always had a shit deal. So, I hope you guys understood that the Night Lords are indeed murderous psychopaths, but they weren't always meant to be murderous psychopaths. And them being murderous psychopaths is not a bad thing. Not every faction has to be relatable, not every faction has to be redeemable, but every faction has to be fucking cool. And the Night Lords are definitely cool. But I want to say a massive thank you to watching, and I want to say a massive thank you to my lovely, beautiful channel members. Shouting out with a brand new member, Mr. Warsmith.Fireheart, who joined in at this Sergeant tier. Thank you very much, sir. It is very much appreciated for you. And I want to say a massive thank you to my Lieutenant tier members. Shout out to Mr. Eddie V3 and Mr. Draw of the Void. Shout out to my Sergeant tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. RB20 Guy, and Mr. Andy McGee. Massive huge shout out to my private tier members, Mr. Thomas Moslawns, Mr. Ivan_SVW, and Mr. Michael Hayeda. I want to thank y'all also very much for joining. It means the absolute world to me. Y'all have no idea how much it means to me that you guys put your faith into me, so thank you also very much. And if you guys want to join up, you can access these videos a full day early usually, but during Brad's Christmas special, which is what we're calling until the 23rd, or at least a special video on the 23rd, that's not going to happen because time constraints, lamau. But normally you gain these videos a full day early, you gain a bunch of awesome benefits, Discord roles, special Discord server, but remember, this will always be free, and even you just watching will be more than enough for me, and I will love you regardless whether or not you give me a $1 or not. Yes, I will. Mwah. But, ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Bradley 101. You were beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Thank you all so very much for watching. Make sure to stay noble out there, boys and girls. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers! Seriously, doing research for this video, it is surprising how many people think that the Night Lords are morally correct. I only killed 10,000 people in this city compared to the millions that you killed taking the planet. It doesn't change the fact that you flayed babies. They are a necessary evil. Evil. Evil is not good, my guy.